Hi, everyone. Welcome to the NASEO, National Association of State Energy Officials webinar on state efforts to advance a clean hydrogen economy. My name is Kirsten Rooka. I'm the Managing Director for Electricity and Energy Security at NASEO. Welcome to this webinar. We're really excited to have you all and to have two excellent speakers who I will introduce in a minute. I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. When you are entering this webinar, and you're not speaking, please make sure you're on mute. If you want to turn on your camera, you're more than welcome to do so. We're hoping to make this interactive. If you have any questions during the Q&A portion, you can feel free to raise your hand or put your question in the chat throughout, and we'll get to it during the Q&A after the presentations. Just a reminder, this is a recorded webinar. And we will make the slides and the recording available after the webinar has concluded. And with that, we are actually going to start this webinar with a pre-webinar survey. We really, NASEO has been working on clean energy hydrogen for a long time. But we wanted to kind of see where the states are, where some of the organizations that have joined this webinar are. So we're going to open up a quick 3-minute survey. I would like to encourage all of you to participate. It's about 7 questions. And it just is trying to guide a little bit where the states and some of the organizations participating are on hydrogen, what sort of the knowledge level is, and where the interest lies to guide future NASEO programming on clean hydrogen. So we will leave the poll open. This is primarily for our understanding. And so thank you so much for participating in that. That really will help NASEO to guide the program on clean hydrogen going forward. So we will continue to wait a little bit as people are filling out the survey. And while people are filling out the survey, I will also put in the chat a publication that NASEO has recently released on hydrogen, which is a nice kind of primer on the role of hydrogen in a variety of sectors, as well as provide some recommendations and suggestions to state energy offices in particular on what potential paths forward are as they're starting out to look at clean hydrogen and the role of clean hydrogen for a variety of energy sector parts. So I will continue to keep the survey open for just a minute. So if you haven't participated yet, please make sure you fill out the survey. It's really helpful to us and we appreciate it. We'll keep this open just a little while longer. But while we'll finish opening up or having the survey, I will introduce the 2 speakers for today. We're really excited to have Oregon and New York present to us on their kind of clean hydrogen approaches from both sides of the coast in the country. We'll start with Oregon, and we're excited to have Rebecca Smith joining us. She's a Senior Energy Policy Analyst at the Oregon Department of Energy, where she focuses on transportation, electrification, and renewable hydrogen. She's the lead author for the Oregon Department of Energy study on renewable hydrogen for Oregon, which is required by SB 333, which was passed in 2021. And she's also spearheading a process in collaboration with Business Oregon to convene Oregon stakeholders interested in a Pacific Northwest Clean Hydrogen Hub. And Rebecca is also a great participant in the Western Green Hydrogen Initiative, which is something NASEO supports together with WEEB and the Green Hydrogen Coalition. And I just want to clarify one item on the survey, if you're still participating in it. When we're asking from a scale of 1 to 5, 1 would be not familiar and 5 would be extremely familiar. Just want to clarify that. And then our second speaker is Ian Latimer. He's a Senior Project Manager with the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA. He works on the Clean Energy Siting and Innovation team, where he works directly with communities, local governments, and industry stakeholders to pursue responsible siting and project development practices across clean energy technologies. He's been co-leading stakeholder engagement and other activities to support the growth of New York's clean hydrogen industry, and is a recent alumni of the Clean Energy Leadership Institute's fellowship program. With that, I will close the survey. Thank you so much, everyone who has participated. We appreciate it. This is very helpful to us, and we'll turn it over to Rebecca for her presentation.
Great, thank you so much for having me. Next slide, please. So, Oregon Department of Energy is the state energy office. You're going to get this slide later and you may review it at your leisure, but we have a mission and we have goals. So take a look later. Next slide. So I want to talk about clean hydrogen and the role of the legislature. And I want to talk first in a general sense and then specifically looking at Oregon. Next slide. So perhaps one of the most important things that a legislature can do right now is to define clean and or renewable hydrogen in statute, or at least begin the discussion. Ideally, with any definitions would be harmonized with other states and what's happening federally and internationally. And this isn't as straightforward as one might normally expect. Clean hydrogen definitions, for example, can differ based on the carbon intensity threshold, and whether it's based on life cycle emissions or just those at the point of production, which is part of the definition we saw in the infrastructure bill from last November. And then with renewable hydrogen, definitions can vary widely based on what feedstocks are eligible and also whether additionality is required. Another role for the legislature is identifying where clean and renewable hydrogen makes most sense for a state in terms of how it might fit with the existing climate and clean energy policy landscape, how the trade-offs associated with clean hydrogen stack up with other renewable options, and possibly even identifying what sectors or areas in the state might make good targets for incentives. Now, of course, the legislature may not be fully up to date on renewable or clean hydrogen, and so they may task a state agency or a consultant with sorting some of these questions out, which, as we'll see, is what happened in Oregon. And as the state legislature determines a state's decarbonization strategy or roadmap, it would be useful to consider what policies that enable clean or renewable hydrogen are already in place, and whether they need to be amended to better include clean hydrogen, or whether there are policies that need to be added to the mix, such as tax breaks, perhaps an RPS carve-out, or other incentives. Next slide, please. And this slide has some animation, so I'll just say click when I want you to click again. So there's been interest in Oregon in hydrogen, and so to help guide the legislature in development of future bills, the state legislature directed my agency, ODO, to conduct a study on renewable hydrogen specifically. Click, please. And as part of the study, ODO is providing guidance on how clean and renewable hydrogen are currently being defined and issues to consider. Click, please. And so while the study does discuss trade-offs associated with renewable hydrogen, click, please. In Oregon, we don't currently have a statewide energy strategy that gives any sort of determination, there we go, on which trade-offs might be most palatable with respect to, timing of emissions reductions or cost or land use or so on. But, oh, go back, please. But at least the study can discuss those trade-offs. And then with respect to enabling policies in Oregon, we've already got a number of them. We have a 100% clean electricity standard, and we have a clean fuels program, and then we also have greenhouse gas reduction targets. So in addition to examining in the study how renewable hydrogen may help achieve some of these policies and goals, the study also discusses other policies that would be critical for growing the hydrogen economy in Oregon. Next slide. All right, on to the study. Next slide. So as Kirsten mentioned, there was a bill passed last year requiring this study. And the overall goal is to provide legislators and stakeholders with a better understanding of the opportunities as well as the barriers associated with both production and consumption of renewable hydrogen in Oregon. And as mentioned, the study focuses solely on renewable hydrogen. And because we don't have a statutory definition for that right now in Oregon, the bill provided one for the purposes of this study. And that's here on the right, when it means renewable gas from energy sources that do not emit greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. So there are a number of requirements for the study. As mentioned, a look at how renewable hydrogen could support existing renewable and clean energy policies. There's also an inventory of current hydrogen volume, current consumption in Oregon, and that's a tricky one. Identification of likely uses for renewable hydrogen in the near term by 2030, and a look at specifically the electricity industry sector and how renewable hydrogen might fit in there as a flexible load or help provide some resiliency, the role that costs can play on adoption, and then an enumeration of the various barriers to adoption of renewable energy in Oregon. Next slide, please. So we started this study last summer and spent most of the rest of 2021 focused on, first of all, identifying and reaching, I think someone's not on mute. Identifying and reaching out to a broad swath, back please, a broad swath of stakeholders, and I'll touch on that again in a moment. We also empaneled a technical advisory committee made up of public sector and nonprofit organizations with hydrogen expertise. And this includes national labs, academia, and so on. Our goal with that, which we call the TAC, was to have an ideally neutral source of expertise for the study. And so that's why we left out the private sector. And then, of course, we dove into the research and analysis. So in early 2022, this year, we continued that analysis. We developed our initial findings, which we presented to first the TAC and then stakeholders for feedback. And we did get a lot of really valuable feedback on that, which I'm happy to answer questions about if there are any. And so we're in the process now of incorporating that feedback, finalizing the findings and the study report. We'll be sending it out for peer review to our TAC and to some of our sister agencies in the state. And then the study report is due to the legislature in September next month, and it will be made public at that time. Next slide, please. So the last thing I want to touch on is stakeholder engagement. And one area that state agencies in Oregon are really working towards improvement is getting more and different stakeholders to the table. If you attend a PUC meeting or an ODO meeting, you often see the same faces. You see utilities, you see project developers, lobbyists, some advocate organizations. But there's a number of areas of stakeholders that are not well represented. And so at ODO, we see not only the renewable hydrogen study, but also the hubs conversation, the renewable clean hydrogen hubs, or the regional clean hydrogen hubs opportunity, as a chance to really engage with a wider spectrum of stakeholders. So, we always invite tribes to the table, but we're really seeking to make inroads with labor, with academia, more advocates that aren't normally participating. So especially those focused on environmental justice, community issues, or original equipment manufacturers or OEMs, some of those technology providers, And then also, our municipalities and counties. And with the study, we really went out of our way to especially ensure that those who might be skeptical of renewable hydrogen were invited to participate. And that's because we feel it's really critical to ensure that we understand their concerns and that we have an opportunity to address them in our work. And so we're really seeking to partner kind of with all stakeholders, not only those who are already excited about renewable hydrogen. Now, my final note is with respect to the hubs, everyone expects this to be a very competitive funding opportunity. So I am limited in what I can say about what's going on in Oregon. But what I can say is that Oregon is collaborating with Washington State on a Pacific Northwest hub concept. And so as part of that, Odo, we have teamed up with our state's business development agency, Business Oregon, to convene interested Oregon stakeholders. And the goals of this are really threefold. First off is we really want to do some level setting because there may be a number of interested parties who just aren't quite at the same level of knowledge and background on hydrogen and renewable hydrogen, and especially how it might play a role in meeting some of the state's goals. The second is to have a communication pipeline to really ensure that stakeholders are up to date on everything that's going on with the hub development, with the development of the concept, with the application development, making sure that they are, not taken aback by any deadlines or requests for information. And then third, we really want to reach a high level of organization. We've seen our Washington State, their hydrogen stakeholders are much more organized than we are in Oregon. And so that's something we really aspire to. They all, kind of know each other to a certain degree and how they might fit in with one another on a project. And so our goal is to kind of try to reach that same level of organization in Oregon. And so that includes, maybe from a project lens where, a project concept includes, the labor component and training and the environmental justice lens and so on. And so that's the convening in a nutshell. We're in the process of getting that launched here and hoping for our first workshop either later this month or early September. And that's all I have today. I'm looking forward to your questions and especially looking forward to hearing what Ian has to say. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. This is great. I have a bunch of questions, but just a reminder to everybody, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A session after Ian's presentation. So with that, I will turn it over to Ian.
Sure, thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate the interest in what I have to say. Love seeing a picture of Mount Hood. I miss it dearly, having spent some time in Oregon myself. But it's nice to be with you guys. Again, Ian Latimer, Senior Project Manager here at NYSERDA. Appreciate the generosity of the Senior Program Manager title on that slide, but admittedly, I am a Senior Project Manager. So let's be candid there. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys. I gave a similar presentation at the Northeast NASEO conference not too long ago, so it's nice to be scaling up in terms of reach and audience, and it's nice to be with you guys. You can go to the next slide, please. My name and contact information is in there, so it'll be in the slides. You're welcome to reach out to me. There's also a link to our Hydrogen Innovation Program page, which has a number of the activities that I'll be introducing in the slides this afternoon. Please feel free to take a look. Always happy to talk any of the activities that we have underway. Next slide, please. Rebecca is not the only one who's got a mission and some goals and promises. I am also not going to beleaguer the point and read it word for word, but you're welcome to peruse this at your leisure, as she said. Next slide, please. So in brief, I want to take a couple of minutes to sort of step back with regard to what hydrogen means in New York State, because everything that we do here at NYSERDA is within the context of our state's broader energy and climate planning activities, which are very underway, very comprehensive, and very complicated, frankly. So if you go to the next slide, please. I'll also note just in the background that all of these slides, I try and take an opportunity to brag about the cool clean energy projects we have in New York. So all the background photos that you see, other than the large hydrogen project and the first one, are New York projects. We love seeing them represented here. So you can't really talk climate policy or planning in New York State without talking about the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA, or the Climate Act. It takes a number of names. It depends on who you ask. But basically, the Climate Act enacted or codified a number of targets and goals for the state of New York that are extremely ambitious with regard to climate and clean energy. We are looking to get an 85% reduction in emissions below 1990 levels, 40% emissions reductions by 2030, 100% zero emission electricity sector by 2040, including an interim target of 70% renewables by 2030. And then a number of technology specific targets throughout the next 10 to 15 years. And that's targets for everything from offshore wind to distributed solar to battery energy storage development, as well as different targets for building electrification and energy efficiency. The timeline here, I won't spend time on each of them, but really the goal here is to demonstrate that the Climate Act really is trying to to chart a path towards reaching these targets by establishing a number of goals along the way to 2050. It's really exciting stuff. The question then becomes, well, goals are great. How do you get there? And so one of the other things that the Climate Act did, and if you go to the next slide, please, the Climate Act, that is a funky looking version of the slide, and I apologize if anyone has trouble reading it, but I think you can kind of make out what's on there, and I'll resend around a cleaner version that doesn't have this issue. The Climate Act enabled a Climate Action Council to negotiate and chart a path forward for New York to reach its ambitious climate and energy targets, including the adoption of a scoping plan, which will make the recommendations for achieving the greenhouse gas emissions reduction limits as set forth in the Climate Act. It's co-chaired by the CEO and president of NYSERDA, Doreen Harris, as well as Basil Sagos, the chair of the commissioner of the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, or DEC. It includes a number of state agencies, a number of governor appointees, and then House and Assembly and Senate appointees as well. They are spread out amongst a number of advisory panels, as well as a couple of working groups, including one specifically focused on the climate justice initiatives and components of the Climate Act, as well as the Just Transition Working Group. One thing I glossed over on the last slide, but is critically important, even before the Justice 40 initiative was enacted or put into place by the Biden administration, the Climate Act enabled or required rather that we have 35 to 40% benefits accumulation to disadvantaged communities in New York. So much in the same way that, the Justice 40 and DOE and the federal government are, sort of hashing out what it means to have a disadvantaged community and to aggregate benefits for that community. We have been doing the same thing in the state of New York in tandem, which is really exciting. And we're really excited to try and, align our efforts with that of the federal government, particularly when it comes to talking about, competitions for federal dollars, such as the Hydrogen Hubs funding opportunity. We're really, really excited to be, in alignment as close as we can with regard to DOE on that. Next slide, please. And I guess, so I'll pause quickly there, which is to say that, the Climate Action Council is the body in New York State that is currently charting a path towards our climate and clean energy targets. And they are reviewing a number of scenarios. In fact, I guess we'll talk about this in just a minute. They're reviewing a number of scenarios which will really decide, how we use which solutions that are available to us, including hydrogen. So this section, evaluating the role of hydrogen in New York's decarbonization strategy, I stand on the shoulders of giants being here with you, because ultimately any path that we take towards hydrogen in New York State will be in conjunction with the scenario and with the scoping plan that is put into place by the Climate Action Council. So I'm happy to sort of tell you a little bit about what that is. And I also encourage everyone that's interested to follow along with me as we watch the Climate Action Council this year, look to finalize the draft scoping plan and look to sort of chart our path, which will help us understand the potential roles and end use opportunities for hydrogen in New York State. Next slide, please. So the integration analysis is a very, very complicated and comprehensive set of data analyses which are informing the scoping plan that's being developed by the Climate Action Council. Again, I know that this is a lot of jargon, so please bear with me, but I hope that it's somewhat coherent. It recognizes a number of critical roles that hydrogen can play in decarbonizing hard to electrify applications. In the nearer term, that might mean medium and heavy duty vehicle decarbonization. It may mean decarbonizing high temperature industrial applications where electrification is not a viable or cost-effective alternative. In longer term, we see roles, or the integration analysis rather sees a role for low carbon fuels such as hydrogen in decarbonizing some of the things that are pretty unique about New York, like our large district heating systems, the steam system in Manhattan that is currently hooked up to hundreds of very old buildings that would cost, on the order of billions of dollars to decarbonize and electrify. Also looking at non-road transportation, material handling, power generation. There's a number of potential opportunities that hydrogen is being evaluated for. And any pursuit of hydrogen for those solutions will depend on the work of the Climate Action Council and the path that they choose. Next slide, please. So within the draft scoping plan, the integration analysis assessed 3 mitigation scenarios in order to meet or exceed the greenhouse gas emission limits as specified under the Climate Act and to achieve carbon neutrality by mid-century. Some of the foundational themes across all of these scenarios are that they're based on findings from advisory panels and supporting analyses. It inherently will look to meet the zero emissions electricity generation by 2040, as we said earlier. They all rely on methane mitigation in agriculture and waste. They all see a critical role for end use demand flexibility, a number of other things like that. However, when you get into the nuts and bolts of those scenarios, that's where you really see a difference. The scenario number 2, so scenario number 1 is one that was put together solely using the recommendations of the advisory panels. And then the other 3 scenarios are, more data-driven and less, policy and discussion-driven. So scenario 2 is a strategic use of low-carbon fuels, which includes the use of bioenergy, includes hydrogen, really focused on difficult to electrify applications. So it's not a blank check to hydrogen. It's saying, we are going to be really strategic about where and how we are using and prioritizing applications for low carbon fuels such as hydrogen. Scenario 3 is the accelerated transition away from combustion, which means you are not looking at the combustion of hydrogen for power generation or heat. You're focused on accelerating electrification for buildings and transportation. And so there's a more of a decreased role for hydrogen in that scenario. And then scenario 4 is the beyond 85% reduction, which even further, limits low carbon fuels, even further accelerates electrification, includes additional reductions on vehicle miles traveled, additional policies beyond that. So those are sort of the 3 scenarios and some combination of, of those that will end up being evaluated and adopted by the Climate Action Council. And that will inform, what ends up being the hydrogen strategy in New York State. If you go to the next slide, please. With all of that said, we cannot, wait until the Climate Action Council has finished its activities, and I will try and sprint through these because I'm sure that we want as much time for Q&A as possible. So in the meantime, New York State has undergone or is undergoing a number of critical, preliminary early stage planning approaches for hydrogen. In the 2022 State of the State, Governor Hochul signaled a commitment to bolstering clean hydrogen industry in New York State, including announcing our intention to compete for the hydrogen hub, recommendations that are owed by NYSERDA and some other agencies as to the development of a regulatory framework for hydrogen, including emissions reduction and measuring, development of codes and safety standards, things like that. She announced our commitment to looking at clean hydrogen fuel cell microgrids as a potential resilience solution for disadvantaged communities looking to displace fossil fuel backup. Deployment of $27 million in hydrogen innovation funding through our competitive procurements at NYSERDA. Developing a proposal for clean hydrogen focused on that district heating and cooling. I mentioned, the steam system in New York City is like a really critical decarbonization obstacle for the state. And then, just further bolstering support for industry collaboration and the expansion of hydrogen industry in New York State. Next slide, please. A few critical activities. We have a trio of sort of early phase road mapping activities that are underway. This is not a Public Service Commission ordered roadmap, unlike some of the other work that my colleagues have done on building electrification and energy storage. This is really preliminary activities. So we're working with NREL to understand the hydrogen opportunity and strategy by commissioning a study with them. We're working with E3 on a policy options analysis to sort of evaluate, what are our potential pathways in New York State and in the Northeast region for, a comprehensive and cohesive approach to policy, which I'll say, like many of the people on the call, we've had, it's been a very pertinent time to be talking about policy with the Inflation Reduction Act and the PTC included therein for hydrogen. So really interesting time in the policy discussion. And then the third road mapping activity is an economic development and supply chain analysis with energetics, focusing on market opportunities for existing firms in New York State that are tangential or involved in the hydrogen supply chain, as well as potential expansion opportunities for others. We're members of the Center for Hydrogen Safety, which is a national led effort with, I believe, principally led by folks from PNNL out in the West Coast. We're also a member of the High Blend Collaborative, which is focused on best practices and safety around the blending of hydrogen into the natural gas distribution network. Next slide, please. Final activities, long duration energy storage funding opportunity. So we are going to be putting money out there for a number of projects, looking at project development and demonstration for long duration storage, anywhere from 6+ to 100+ hours of rated power. Hydrogen is an applicable technology under that, and we expect those awards to be announced in the near future. We're under an MOU with the Danish Ministry of Climate, Energy and Utilities. We've talked a lot about, hydrogen best practices, power to X, and carbon capture and utilization. They are, pretty advanced in those areas in a way that many state governments are less so in the US. And then finally, I won't belabor the point, but much like Rebecca, stakeholder engagement and education is a very critical component to the work that we're doing in New York State. I would say that we have maybe the, if not one of the most active, environmental justice community-based organization communities, and we very much have made that a central part of the work that we've done. So we've assembled an advisory group that's helped lead stakeholder engagement activities. We've put on state of the science programming and educational events, which is meant to specifically, help people understand the chief concerns and obstacles with regard to hydrogen, help sort of level the playing field in terms of those conversations in the state. And we will continue that work, which is great. I know we're almost out of time. So last slide, next slide, please. Wouldn't be hydrogen if we didn't talk hub for just a minute. So please allow me the final slide. As I mentioned, Governor Hochul in the State of the State announced New York's intent to compete for a hub. And much like Rebecca, I can only go into so much detail, but happy to speak a little bit to that. In March, the governor announced a multi-state agreement. We're working with other states in the Northeast to form a Northeast Regional Hydrogen Hub in collaboration with our colleagues in these other states, as well as critical partners across the ecosystem, whether that be the New York hydrogen ecosystem, the national ecosystem, the global ecosystem. And that includes developers, prominently including offshore wind developers, recognizing the significant opportunities and offshore wind progress that we've made in New York State, including most recently, shout out to my colleagues who've launched our third offshore wind solicitation about a week ago, which is really exciting stuff. Integrators, OEMs, transport fleet operators, industrial gas providers, utilities, colleges, universities, economic and workforce development NGOs, and many others. We've got 60+ partners on our MOU, as well as a number of Northeast states that are all, helping develop a vision for the Northeast Regional Hydrogen Hub. As many of you on this call know, we are eagerly awaiting the funding opportunity. We love that DOE just gets to say September, October, and we don't know what that actually means. So I am with you all in waiting for the final details that are in the FOA. But we're excited to build on the legacy of the Northeast as a center for hydrogen and fuel cell innovation. And again, really want to be very intentional about centralizing our focus on climate and environmental justice as part of our hub application. So with that, I will pause. I'm sure I'm over my time, but thank you guys for having me. Happy to do some Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Ian. And thank you so much, Rebecca, for your great presentations and updating us on what's happening, exciting things that are happening in each of your states. So just a reminder to the audience, I see a few questions in the chat already, but feel free to add more into the chat. We'll get to as many as we can. I also have some questions. So I wanted to maybe start out a little bit with that regional discussion that both of you alluded to. And I'm want to phrase this as an aside to the hub conversation, because I know that's a sensitive topic, and I know that you're limited in what you can talk about. But I was wondering if you both could maybe put this into a context a little bit for us, like what you see as the advantage of working on this in a regional sense, outside even of any kind of hub application. What are some of the things that you can leverage for the region, or through the regional activities that you're undertaking? And maybe we'll start with Rebecca.
Thank you. I think that, first off, for, specifically speaking about Oregon and Washington, one of the benefits is that we definitely have different complementary areas of expertise and different organizations spread out across the two states that blend well together when thinking about hydrogen. And additionally, we share a number of generation resources, and generally speaking, our generation mix is highly renewable. We've got a lot of hydro. A number of those legacy hydropower facilities provide power to both Oregon and Washington. And our goal is to fit the hydrogen hub concept within a longer term, broader concept. And so we really see the hub as an opportunity to start planting the seed that in a longer term view would start to link up together, hopefully later with pipelines, and then spider across to other infrastructure within the region as well. And so, we see it as kind of that important first step to hopefully both of us states developing a hydrogen economy that is from the get-go highly integrated, and hopefully we'll get some economies of scale and be able to move a little bit faster.
Ian, maybe from your perspective?
Yeah, first and foremost, we want to do a regional approach because we want to make NASEO happy. That seems to be the key thing to do. Well, I'll say first, I think that a lot of what Rebecca said is also reminiscent of the situation in the Northeast. When you say legacy hydro, my ears perk up, and I think that that's like a key similarity for us as well. I think there's also a lot of shared excitement around the role of offshore wind in the Northeast. So the more that we can be in coordination around, future technology opportunities, the better. I think that I sort of touched on this in the end, but the history of innovation and expertise in these technologies with hydrogen in particular is really prominent in the Northeast. New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. There's a lot of rich history around fuel cell and hydrogen innovation that is ripe for collaboration and information sharing. The states in the Northeast are also uniquely dense, uniquely connected in terms of transportation infrastructure, in terms of energy infrastructure and other things like that. So there is a lot of collaboration to build off of. And I think that it's a really good opportunity to continue that. And I'll say, in moving beyond the hub conversation specifically, no one likes to say this, but if you didn't win a hub, you still need to plan for things. Hydrogen is happening whether you win a hub or not. At least in New York, we've got developers that are interested in evaluating or going forward with plans for hydrogen projects. So even if you don't get a hub, you need to be planning, you need to be coordinating, you need to be working in conjunction with your neighbors. And so that's really the approach here. It's just that the hubs gives you a clean reason to start those conversations. So I think the policy coordination is a really key piece. The shared interest in technologies, the shared history in technologies. I think those are all reasons that the Northeast collaboration is a winning approach for us, really.
Hey, thank you both. Yes, and we always love to see regional conversation or coordination on the NASEO side, but we also just love great state approaches. So we always are excited to see what the states are doing. One of the questions in the chat that I wanted to pick up was on the permitting processes and kind of how you streamline that with local authorities. And maybe we'll start with Ian to see if there's been experience already or what sort of the thinking from NYSERDA sides is.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think, thus far in terms of permitting, it's all been done through sort of like other state agencies, so I can't really speak on their behalf. You know, the DEC, the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York, I think is really the one that's to date done the sign off there. I'll say, especially for like large scale projects, you know, permitting has been an increased focus of New York State in recent years. We created a separate state agency called the Office of Renewable Energy Siting, that is specifically designed to be like the one-stop shop permitting office for large scale renewable projects. To date, it's really focused, that office is focused on renewables. So it doesn't include storage, it doesn't include hydrogen projects as of now, but I would imagine that we will be taking a very serious look at, you know, the permitting process and lead time for hydrogen projects. I'll say that that's a concern that's really near and dear to my heart as well. Before becoming a hydrogen guy, I was working on our clean energy siting team, which is working with communities and local governments to try and overcome soft costs and other obstacles to, you know, getting these projects built. I'll say that there is an incredible need to do education with communities in a way that even goes beyond the needs for other renewable technologies as well. There's a lot of emotional reactions and memories of hydrogen that need to be overcome when it comes to permitting and siting. So I'll say that, like, I don't have a great answer in terms of our current approach because it's still pretty early stage, but I'll say that it is absolutely a critical focus of our work. And that means everything from like community engagement up to state entity permitting processes that we will be evaluating moving forward.
Great. And I think like building off on a great stakeholder engagement process will probably help with the permitting going forward. Rebecca, do you want to add anything from your perspective?
I do, and I'm so glad that the question was asked. This is something that, you know, we in Oregon have certainly identified as an issue just in terms of our broader climate and energy goals. You know, we, like New York, have a very energized stakeholder base from a number of different viewpoints. And, you know, there's been a lot of pushback from project developers that the current siting requirements are, you know, difficult and time consuming and maybe not always clear. And this, I think, speaks to a broader need in Oregon or even within the region for, you know, perhaps a clear energy strategy that really gives some guidance on what we're going to view as the most important trade-offs, because just in terms of even just building out the renewables that we need to meet our clean electricity standard, there are going to be trade-offs. So which are the ones that are most important to us? Is it high value farmland? Is it salmon? Is it, you know, urban air quality? You know, there's decisions to be made. There's no one right path. And so hydrogen's, you know, kind of suffering from the same difficulties with respect to at least getting, you know, renewable sited, if they're purpose built to go to an electrolyzer. You know, I think also, you know, some of the discussions about kind of who has the jurisdiction and who should have the jurisdiction for blending with natural gas pipelines. You know, these are all things that at ODA we touch upon in the renewable hydrogen study as areas for further consideration. Are there streamlinings that we can do within our siting and our permitting that would apply to perhaps not only hydrogen facilities, but also renewable energy facilities? And if so, is there a way that we can harmonize those with nearby jurisdictions? So kind of like Ian, we haven't sorted it out yet, but we're very much in the midst of launching these conversations and trying to think through what the various implications are, because obviously this is going to be you know, a big question as we try to develop an entirely new economy, you know, a hydrogen economy within our broader clean energy economy.
Just maybe one final thought on that point is that I think it can be hard to sort of have the permitting and siting conversations when you're still having conversations around like guardrails for end use applications that are part of your strategy, production methodologies that are part of your strategy, all of that stuff. So like, yeah, it's a critically important thing, I think, but it seems that we're perhaps a little early to really formally have those processes in place. Just because we're still really trying to figure out, you know, which are the end use applications that we are making central to our strategy, because permitting is going to vary a lot if you're talking about anything from, fueling infrastructure for vehicles to hydrogen combustion turbines to, any other application. It all will look pretty different.
No, that's a very good point, and it touches on something that we just got in the chat as a question, which I think is an excellent question, and I think something that the states are grappling with, and so it'd be interesting to hear New York's and Oregon's perspective on this issue of kind of the chicken versus egg challenge of funding. Are you funding production, supply versus funding use, demand? What kind of end use case are we looking at? So how do you both approach that from your state's perspective?
I mean, I'll jump in and say that, at least we have, some of those, as I call them, enabling policies that help build the demand. So for example, our clean fuels program gives credit. We do have a few entities getting clean fuels program credits for hydrogen use. I believe it's all for forklifts at logistics centers right now, but so there is a real incentive there for consumption in a transportation end use. We have our climate protection plan, or CPP, which goes into effect in 2023 with respect to greenhouse gas limitations, and that is going to hit our natural gas utility sector really hard. And really, it's humane pathways for meeting that are going to be renewable natural gas and, low carbon intensity hydrogen. So, we haven't really made a concerted effort to say, these are the things that we're doing to prime the pump of, for example, demand. But we do at least have some of the policies that are helping with that. And, on the other side with the consumption, I think part of that goal of the study was at least to understand, okay, well, who's consuming it right now? And then what does that look like? Which policies may give them an incentive to consume more? And then looking beyond that as to what areas might we want to incentivize. But honestly, we're not yet really addressing that chicken and egg problem in a strategic way yet in Oregon.
It's an incredibly good question, and one that I also think is kind of hard to answer. We have the tremendous privilege in New York State of being very large and having climate and energy as a central focus of our state government. So there's a lot of other agencies and teams that are involved here. So I can't fully speak on behalf of NYSERDA or other agencies as well, or other entities in New York, but we're kind of doing both on some level. NYSERDA specifically, I think, has been a lot more focused on end use applications for hydrogen. I mentioned I guess it's not an end use application, but I mentioned the funding for long duration energy storage, which again, maybe not an end use, but I think of it, it's not production, I'll tell you that. We got that funding. There are other programs in New York, also, zero emission transportation programs that have seen, demonstration projects with municipal or regional transit bus fleets so that they can procure, hydrogen vehicles and fueling infrastructure. NYSERDA has previously funded, early stage pilot projects around fueling infrastructure at universities. We've done previously, a number of fuel cell projects that we've incented, which were, I think, mostly natural gas fuel cells, not hydrogen, but, adjacent technologies that share, similar interests. Other, places in the state, you've seen support for hydrogen production. So, most recently there was an announcement from NYPA, the New York Power Authority, that they were allocating, they do these hydropower allocations for, capacity that we have at our legacy hydro programs, where we're now knowing that some of that hydropower will be going towards clean hydrogen production. So I think, different approaches happening throughout the state. It really kind of depends where you look. I'll say NYSERDA mostly to date has not had hydrogen production incentives, but even that is, potentially changing as we look to evaluate opportunities for, again, I mentioned, offshore wind, which is a critical advantage and strategy in the Northeast. As part of our offshore wind procurements, we're looking at the possibility of pairing hydrogen production with offshore wind. So I think we're trying to sort of have a foot, I don't want to say a foot on the chicken and the egg. That sounds terrible. PETA won't be happy with me for saying that. I don't mean that. We have a foot in each. We have a foot in each bucket. We're I think trying to sort of recognize the need to do both at the same time, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. And maybe support the chicken and the egg on both sides, not have the foot on
Yes, yes. I was gonna say one foot in each camp. One, you know what I'm saying.
That's great. Thank you both. It was a difficult question, but thank you so much for your honest answer on those. We have one more question in terms of kind of the types of pilot project that you both envision that are needed for market adoption.
I mean, I will say, in my opinion, and I hope that this resonates, it is all about proving demand for hydrogen. Not everyone knows how to make it, but the producing hydrogen thing, I think, is really less the issue. The challenge facing scaling hydrogen is proving demand and building a market. So I'd say that like pilot projects that are focused on scaling demand in a way that is applicable in multiple jurisdictions or like scalable to a large degree, I think is really helpful. You know, a lot of people are focused on existing uses of fossil hydrogen, you know, in ammonia production, in fuels and refining. Those are places where we really need it. You know, there's a lot of attention in Sweden where they're doing steel manufacturing using direct reduced iron that is, you know, reducing the amount of natural gas needed and fossil fuels needed to make steel. Other, you know, potential pilot projects that I'm really interested to see are also around manufacturing, you know, chip fab, glass manufacturing, cement production. All of those things are pilot projects that I think are really, really interesting and types of projects that I would love to see happen. And the transportation piece as well. I mentioned, you know, we've got projects in New York State. We've got municipal and regional bus fleets that are, you know, trying to prove in cold climates, you know, they've seen what battery electric trucks or buses can do. You know, there's a lot of optimism there. There's also recognizing that, you know, you can't choose one solution. So if we can prove that hydrogen is a viable alternative for, you know, decarbonizing long distance transit fleets, that's incredibly exciting. So those are some of the sort of types of projects that I think we're interested in seeing.
Hey, and Rebecca?
I definitely agree with Ian that kind of the overarching goal with early projects is to really make that proof of concept you know, crystal clear, and especially with respect to demand. For example, our largest transit agency in the state, TriMet, they did a hydrogen feasibility study last year and essentially came to the conclusion of, well, we don't have, you know, local supply, and especially for clean or low CI, you know, hydrogen, you know, the CI is going to be affected by transporting it all the way to Oregon from California, you know, Nevada, wherever, you know, but also there's a lot of volatility there in terms of price, in terms of availability. And so overall, I think what we're starting to see proposed, and I think what would be great to see, are projects that are already pairing up production with demand. Pardon me. And so, for example, our largest natural gas utility, Northwest Natural, they have a lot of interest in clean hydrogen. And they're also looking at, you know, they have an idea of using blue hydrogen as a stair step, where they can pair it, you know, using a fossil feedstock, natural gas, but then pairing it with carbon capture. And they're still kind of in the concept phase, but they're looking at locating that production close to potential off-takers. And so, you know, pulp and paper mills, for example, that, you know, could substitute hydrogen for high heat end uses. You know, we'd love to see production projects that are, you know, relatively close to transportation corridors in Oregon. We don't yet have a single hydrogen fueling station, and so that's really difficult to suggest that transportation, you know, end uses start migrating to hydrogen without that supply. So I really think that we really need to co-locate as much as possible the production and the consumption, but hopefully with built-in production beyond that expected, you know, you know, that there's going to be some surplus so that we can start figuring out what the transportation looks like and what are our best options for doing that in a low carbon intensity way.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Ian. I wanted to reserve a couple of minutes at the end here because there is actually in the chat a question on what's next for NASEO. And so I wanted to go to the next slide and actually talk a little bit about what NASEO is doing, because we're really excited to announce a new NASEO Clean Hydrogen State Working Group that is open to our state members. And our objectives there are really to support the states in developing clean hydrogen opportunities, to provide opportunities like this where we can exchange best practices, challenges, and programmatic considerations, and also allow states to really provide significant input in developing a support network for states on clean hydrogen, as well as the toolkit that NASEO is developing that can help states navigate some of these development processes in their state and allow them to really take their conversation on clean hydrogen to the next level. So in the chat, we've put a link. We will put a link on how to sign up for this. This is for our state members. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to my colleagues, Grace Lowe and Kelsey Jones. They've also put their emails in the chat there. I'm also excited to announce that we have a kind of a sister effort that my colleague Rodney Sobin, who's also on the call today, leads. And that is a new initiative on a state industrial working group. Certainly hydrogen also plays a role there, to work with interested states to advance the industrial and manufacturing goals. And there will be a webinar held on August 24th from 3 to 4. Which will discuss relevant DOE tools, programs, and resources. So we're really excited to kind of launch these two efforts to support our state members on clean hydrogen and industrial considerations. And if you have any questions, again, please feel free to reach out to my colleagues. And before we finally close, we also wanted to just poll the wider audience again on some of the additional topics that you all want to see as we're continuing to provide education and webinars on these clean hydrogen topics. So this is another quick poll. You will see at the very end a question that says what other topics are of interest aside from the ones that we sort of pre-selected. And feel free to, if you don't see your topic there as a consideration, feel free to just throw that in the chat as another potential options. And while people fill out the survey, we really appreciate that as that guides our programming. I just wanted to conclude by thanking Ian and Rebecca so much for outlining what is happening on their state level. And I really appreciate everybody's attendance to this webinar. So with that, feel free to stick around to fill out the survey, but appreciate your attendance and appreciate Ian and Rebecca's time.